Ranking the premiums in FPL. Today we are having a look at the most expensive players in the game, and we're going to have a look at those that you should be picking into your teams for game week 1, potentially those that you should be waiting on and buying in a few weeks, and maybe some of them that you should be completely avoiding altogether throughout the season. What is up, everyone? Harry here. Before we dive in, 1,000 likes at the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here as well. And today we are having a look at the premiums. We're going to go through the 7 most expensive players in the entire game. We'll talk about their pros, their cons, potentially some alternatives to them from the same team that you could try and cover them from. For example, have a look at some underlying data, and I'll give you a ranking of which of them I think you should be buying into your FPL team for game week 1 and also throughout the season as well. Before we do, there is a lot of data used in this video. Again, I've taken it, I've simplified it, and I've just picked out the top bits that I think are useful for you. If you want the more detail, it is taken from the FFScout App that I'm using all throughout preseason and the members area over on their website as well. But to start off, let's have a look at the real basics for them in terms of points scored, goals and assists that they had at the end of last season. We are looking at the 7 most expensive players in the game. So that is De Bruyne, Foden, Son, Saka, Palmer, Salah and Erling Haaland. There is no Ollie Watkins, there's no Isak, and there's no premium defenders in these. I covered all of those in the videos that I've done earlier in the week in terms of top defenders, top midfielders, and top forwards if you want to go and check those out. But we are looking at these 7 players, which are the real ones that sort of break the budget and means you have to restructure your team if you go and buy them in. Now, of course, when you're looking at totals, you have to take into account some of the injuries that they had. Kevin De Bruyne played by far the least amount of minutes, but he does come bottom for points and the number of goals. Phil Foden actually scored 19 goals last season, but only 8 assists, much more of a goal threat. Erling Haaland, of course, much more of a goal threat as well, but only picking up 8 assists last season. But what's really important is when we start to look at the data in a little bit more detail and look at points per 90 and XGI per 90. So when they were actually on the pitch, how many points were they scoring and what was their expected output per 90? And then at the bottom, what we've got from that Fantasy Football Scout members area, we've got their predicted points going into the new season. So you can start to see over the first 6 weeks, which of those you should be considering buying into your team. Now, what is quite good is that the top 3 rank first for one of the metrics that we're looking at, and the bottom 3 rank bottom for one of the metrics. And then you've got Bukayo Saka sort of ranked completely in the middle. Kevin De Bruyne out on the left-hand side is predicted to score the least amount of points over the first 6. However, when we start to consider his minutes, he is one of the Manchester City players that's been back in training for quite a while. When you look at next up, you have Phil Foden. He actually had the lowest and the worst data out of any of the 7 that we've got here. But of course, he is a world-class finisher, which is why he does tend to outperform those. And when you look at his points per 90, he does rank as one of the best on the list. When you look at points per 90 last season, it actually was Son that was the worst. So he underperformed every single one on the list. Now, he did play a lot of minutes, which is why that might be slightly higher. But De Bruyne, lowest for projected points. Foden, the lowest for expected returns. And then Son was the lowest for actual points per 90 when he was on the pitch. Again, Bukayo Saka sits pretty middle of the road for a lot of those metrics. Then you start to look at the more expensive ones. So the 3rd most expensive player in the game in Cole Palmer at 10.5 million was the highest points per 90 of anyone last year. Of course, didn't play the first 7 games for Chelsea, but was still the highest scoring player in the entire game. Mo Salah is predicted to be the highest scoring player in FPL over the first 6 weeks with 6.7 points per 90 minutes he's on the pitch. Very, very closely followed by Erling Haaland at 6.6, who was the best in terms of expected goals and assists last season. Only 2 players in the entire game get over 1 expected return last year, and that is Mo Salah at 1.01 and Erling Haaland. So effectively what this does show us is you are going to get what you pay for over the course of the season. Erling Haaland is projected, along with Mo Salah, to be the highest scoring players in the game. Cole Palmer is expected to be slightly below. Then you move down to a Saka, then you move down to a Son, a Foden, and then Kevin De Bruyne projected to be the lowest scoring. So FPL have done well with their pricing this season, but we aren't picking players for the entire season. We are picking players for just the first 6 game weeks. And let's look at their sort of opening 8 fixtures that we've got here. Some of them do have a better opening run, which is why you see those projected points on the Fantasy Football Scout members area being slightly better. When you look at those Liverpool fixtures, for example, they are the only team not to have a single red fixture in the entire of their first 8. Whereas when you compare him to Erling Haaland, he has 2 red fixtures in that Arsenal and Newcastle away fixture, which is why those projections favour Mo Salah slightly over Erling Haaland. Cole Palmer, of course, has a difficult fixture in both Game Week 1 and Game Week 8. There is a difficult start to the season for Bukayo Saka, which I think is really worth highlighting. A lot of people do believe that Saka is one of the best assets in the game, along with the likes of Kai Havertz, Odegaard, Saliba, the whole Arsenal team. But they have the hardest opening run of the season out of pretty much any of the premiums that we're looking at, which is why in my drafts at the moment, we haven't got a Bukayo Saka. We haven't got any Arsenal players in there. Son is up next. Again, 2 difficult fixtures in the first 4 for them. At least there's a couple of easy ones for Arsenal in the opening 3. But if you get to game week 3 with the likes of Son, you might be a little bit pressurised that those couple of fixtures coming up are not as easy. And then you've got the 2 cheaper Manchester City options again with the same opening fixtures that Erling Haaland do have. So Salah definitely has the best opening. Then it's probably closely followed by both Chelsea and Manchester City. Then it's probably Spurs, and then Arsenal definitely have the most difficult run. Now, one other really interesting thing to look at when you're talking about the premiums is the alternatives that you can buy from their teams. Is there a player in their team that can cover them for a similar value or a cheaper value? At Manchester City, so for Haaland, you've got both you could cover with Foden and Kevin De Bruyne. There is also a cheap option of Oscar Bob at 5 million, who looks set to be starting the first few games for Manchester City, particularly because the late returns of the likes of Foden at the start of the season. The issue is, and one of the reasons Mo Salah is so popular, is the lack of alternatives at Liverpool. It is so unclear at the moment who is going to be that forward line. They do have one more pre-season friendly before the season starts, which might try and shed a little bit of light on it. But at the moment, it's practically impossible to predict who it is that's going to start in that front line alongside Mo Salah. So you are paying not only for the good data and the good projections that you get from Salah, but for the security of minutes that you just don't get with another Liverpool player. Now, at Chelsea, Cole Palmer does have an option at a 6.5 million option, who is very, very highly owned at the moment, in Nkunku, or even Noni Madueke, who's doing very, very well in pre-season. Now, Nkunku is the one that's very popular, and a lot of people are offering him as a potential route to cover Cole Palmer. At time of recording, Cole Palmer is also not back in Chelsea training, and nor is Phil Foden. That is a massive caveat for those two that make them big red flags for me going into the start of the season. Bukayo Saka, although his data is good, does have 2 cheaper options that can massively sort of compare him. He didn't start their most recent friendly, and Kai Havertz got 2 assists and a goal in that, despite playing a lot of the game in midfield. Looking at Son as well, you've got Johnson, who looks pretty nailed. Then you've got 2 other options. Kulusevski is currently playing up front for them in their pre-season games, or you've got someone like a Dominic Solanke or an Ivan Toney, who's heavily linked with Spurs, but of course not an option at the moment unless he signs between now and the start of the season. So a lot of them have coverage apart from Mo Salah, and that is the big thing, and that is why Mo Salah is so highly owned at the start of the season, and it will impact his ranking for me based on early versus late ranking, because early on you want the security, but by game week 7 or 8 we might know who that Liverpool front liners are going to be, and maybe you can cover Salah a little bit better. So just to put that all into a little bit of a conclusion and try and rank them for you. For me, Erling Haaland, looking at the online data and those opening fixtures, is the best pick for the first sort of game week 1 team and for the majority of the season. Mo Salah is the second best pick out of all of them for the start of the season. But when we start to look at the longer term, I don't think he's actually worth the 12.5 once we know whether you can buy a Darwin, a Diego Jota, a Gakpo, a Luis Diaz, because I think one of those at 7.5 will be easily able to cover Mo Salah at that 12.5 million price tag. But in game week 1, he's ranked so highly because you are buying the stability that he gives you in that Liverpool lineup. Because we don't see Cole Palmer back in Chelsea training yet, for me, he's a big risk, and of course plays Manchester City in game week 1. So he's low down in terms of a game week 1 pick, but does come up as an overall pick throughout the season. So 5th and then 4th. Bukayo Saka does rank as the 3rd best option for game week 1. He's been back in preseason training for a long time. He does have a nice run of fixtures over the first 3 before they get a little bit more difficult. And actually over the season, I think he's the 2nd best premium to own and actually overtakes Mo Salah and is only behind that of Erling Haaland. I think he's a great option at 10 million because I think they are the 2nd best team in the league and he's so nailed and he's on penalties, which sort of combines a lot of what Haaland, De Bruyne and Foden give. So 2nd best for me there. Heung-min Son is an interesting one. He was going to be higher up until there is massive links to another forward going into the start of the season. It does look like one of Ivan Toney or Dominic Solanke will join for Spurs before game week 1 or even just after. And that will massively hinder Son because there is a chance that Son will lose penalties. He will be out wide, which is always a debate whether he's better out wide or central. But again, the first 2 fixtures are great, but after that, the next 2 are pretty tricky for him. Foden is a really interesting one. I just don't see him starting game week 1, and I still think he's doubt to start game week 2. So he is actually the worst ranked out of any of these as a game week 1 pick. But overall, I think he will have another fantastic season for Manchester City. And then once you look at Kevin De Bruyne, Kevin De Bruyne is one that I think is going massively under the radar as a game week 1 pick. He is back in training. He is feels like he's ready for the start of the season. Without Foden there, he feels like he must start. His attacking returns last year were pretty good. And without Julian Alvarez there, his minutes feel much more secure this year, unless they, of course, sign an Eze or another option in that area. If they don't, De Bruyne at 9.5 million should definitely be back on the picture, and definitely especially going into game week 1. Now, once they get to Champions League, we know De Bruyne can't play the minutes quite as much as before, so he does drop down the ranking as a season-long pick, but for game week 1, he should absolutely be considered. Now, just to put that all into a bit of data, we have actually had projections for the number of points that will be scored in this FPL season by RobTFPL on Twitter. Fantastic account. You'll see me use him all throughout preseason using SpreadX data. And what's really interesting is over the course of the season, Saka is actually predicted to score the most points. Now, this does take into account a little bit of injury uncertainty. So Erling Haaland is a little bit lower, whereas Saka plays pretty much every game. But what this does highlight to me is you can get away with not owning Salah and Haaland over the course of the season. It's just that security going into the start of the season that you know you're going to get. They've had a full preseason off, which is why they are my number 1 and 2 ranked. They've played no international tournaments. They are fully ready to go in game week 1. So this is the premiums. I do think Haaland and Salah are number 1 and 2, and it is worth trying to build a team with them both in. If not, pick one of them definitely. I don't massively like the team that don't have Haaland and Salah, and then add one of the others, potentially Bukayo Saka, who I think is a great option to start the season if you're not going for an Odegaard or a Kai Havertz, who could cover him at Arsenal. That is the premiums. We are now going to be looking at a few other players to buy before going into a lot of different draft templates for you for the start of the season. If this is useful, let me know what premiums you own in the comment section down below. I'm currently on Haaland and Salah, and I don't have any of the others in this list. Let me know which of them you own in the comment section down below. Are you Haaland in, Haaland out, Salah in, Salah out? I'm interested because there is definitely a dynamic switching, and we will talk about all of that in a couple of videos that I've got planned over the next few days. Thank you all so much for watching. 1,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here. It is 1 week to go until the start of the FPL season. We'll be back every single day between now and then, and I will see you all again tomorrow.